Hello again, everyone, and welcome back to Reddit Aliens. I'm John, and as always, thank you so much for being here. Good topic? Let's do it. Subway workers, tunnel rats, and explorers of Reddit. What's your creepiest, most unexplained story from the underground? Please remember to like, share, and subscribe. I went exploring with a bunch of friends at the Transel Lunatic Asylum. While this is not underground in its entirety, portions of it are. The buildings were left with hospital equipment, beds, books, patient files, literally everything. It's eerie, as if a zombie apocalypse occurred and everyone left. It operated from 1864 to 1994. The facility was self-sustaining, i.e. the patients farmed the land and had all resources on campus. The year this was open, a lot of horror stories came out of this place. This wasn't the modern-day psychiatric ward, more like a prison, where families paid a lot of money to hide their mentally ill, where the state put undesirables. There's an underground network that was heavily blocked off with chains. However, the main buildings were easily accessible, but the access ways to the underground were blocked off inside as well. Every time we got near one of the underground tunnel systems, we could hear faint music playing. It sounded like a music box playing. We found a bent, wired gate and attempted to file in. The music got louder, and we were all pretty freaked out. We were all promptly arrested before attempting to go into the tunnels. There's a lot of speculation about the tunnels still to this day. The new owner said he was afraid of asbestos and was fearing for our safety. He was very grim. He agreed to drop charges if we never went back. We obliged happily. Still, I sometimes think of my interactions there, all of the remnants left behind, and get severely creeped out. So I've done a lot of things like this, and there's usually an explanation for anything that seems untoward. Disused mental hospitals, train tunnels, sewers, abandoned stations, utility tunnels, military installations, the lot. It's usually just your mind if you think something is weird. One story that springs to mind was being in a storm drain in London. The storm drains are generally dry, but there might be water elsewhere. The tunnels can stretch for miles at a time. We would always listen out for moving water and any changes in air pressure or temperature, just to know whether there was going to be any change in water level or something dumped into the tunnel further up the line. I was in this sewer, and there was a massive gust of wind. No idea what caused it, but the chap I was with looked at me, and we both just said, "We're leaving right now." We stomped up the tunnel and made our way out into a dry night. Something in that change of air pressure and temperature told us something, and I'm not sure what it was, but we both knew that leaving there and then was the right thing to do. Recently, I was visiting New York City and stayed at a hotel inside the city. It was a fairly nice place, but it was also a pretty old building that was not built with the intention of getting so much use. For example, there were only 2 tiny elevators available for guests, and the hotel was at least 15 to 20 floors. The wait for the elevators took so long that I decided I'd use the stairs. For some reason, there was 4 to 5 stairwells in the building, accessible from each floor, and most wound up in different parts of the lobby. I remembered using one of them the day before, and I thought it was stairwell D, so I took it. After descending for a while, I passed level 2. The next exit wasn't marked, but I thought it had to be level 1. I went through the exit door and found myself in an unfamiliar hallway with a very low ceiling. It could only have been about 7 feet, and sparse lighting. It wasn't eerie, but it definitely didn't look like it was intended for guests. Still a little curious, I decided to check it out and see if I could find the lobby. I walked for a minute down a long hallway with kind of a dirty stone floor and some industrial double doors. There didn't seem to be anyone around, and it was pretty quiet. I rounded a corner, and to my immediate right was this big window set into the wall. Though it was a clean white room that reminded me a little of my high school's cafeteria. I remember thinking that, but I'm not exactly sure why. There was also a man sitting and looking at his phone. He must have been about 5 feet away from me, and only the window separated us. He saw me and looked a little startled. I waved and was about to ask where the lobby was, but he quickly pointed for me to turn back. Neither of us ever said a word. It was just the weirdest experience being in such a silent, dirty place, and then seeing a modern room with a person. I speed walked out and took the elevator. In retrospect, I probably just stumbled into some storage area under the lobby. It definitely wasn't the same level, but it was the strangest discovery, and I like to imagine what could have gone on down there and why I wasn't allowed to be there. I'm not sure I qualify since the exploration seems rather straightforward to me. Another group of explorers, still, I have a pretty good story. I attended the University of Huddersfield, and one of the accommodation facilities for students is called Stros Hall. Stros Hall was previously a psychiatric hospital and asylum. Most of the buildings were demolished. I believe 2 are currently in use to house students, and then off-site there's the main building and the mortuary. The main building was off-limits, and I believe security guards were in place. But when you have several hundred drunk students living nearby, you're basically just grabbing sand. I went with a group of people, and we intended to have some kind of DIY seance. Darren Brown had done his not long before. So we toddled off with tarot cards and a Ouija board. It was all pretty funny, to be honest. None of us really took it seriously, and having seen the Darren Brown seance, I was really skeptical. Then the torch died, and we heard several loud knocks. We picked off sharpish. But again, it likely was somebody effing with us after hearing the panic caused by the torch going out. Might have even been the security guards. I wouldn't blame them. Where I grew up, there were a few storm drains that all went to the same pond. My friend A and I were messing around in the woods near one of the openings, and we could hear this really sharp, echoing cry that made us both nervous. We thought it was the wind at first, and then A threw a rock into the opening, and it stopped for a minute. So at this point, we figured it must be something alive. We climbed back out of the woods and went to the next pipe and could hear it there too. Now I'm scared, and A is trying to prove how he's not afraid of anything. So on we go to the next one. This one is quieter, so we go back in the other direction. Now I'm being a baby because it's raining a little and I'm not supposed to get my clothes wet. I was around 9, so I'm begging A to go home. As he stops to assure me we are safe, we hear this horrible deep wailing noise, and I start to panic. I can feel my pulse in my neck and I'm sweating. Then A puts his face in the opening for the drain. The noise happens again, and A takes off down the hill and into the pipe opening. I'm now crying because A abandoned me in the rain and there's a monster in the pipes. A starts yelling my name, and I have to put my face to the opening to hear him, so now I'm really crying. And he tells me to call the fire department. So I run to the nearest neighbor and tell them too. I explain I don't know why we need to call, but that A is in the pipe outside their house. They get all snotty because A is the heaviest kid in the neighborhood, so they assume he got stuck. They call the non-emergency number, and a truck comes to remove the cover. It turns out A recognized the sound of an angry cat and ran into the pipe. It was a mama cat and her kittens, but the kittens were stuck beneath the wire grate inside the drain, so the rain was drowning them, and they were crying. Thanks to A, they got all but one kitten out and the mama cat in time before the rain got worse. He got to keep one of the kittens, and no one believed us, even though we were both there and there were firemen. No one believed he could fit into the pipe. I was in a house that the police confiscated from a biker gang. My job was to assess the damage for an insurance company. The walls were all painted white, and the floor was sheets of plywood painted dark red. I was going around measuring each room, opening doors, no problem. I then opened the linen closet, and it had deep scratch marks on the inside and dents on the back of the door, like someone was trying to escape. The freaky part was straight ahead at my head level, a round red splatter pattern on the back wall that had been painted over with a coat of white paint. Freaked me the out, like someone was trapped in there, and then someone opened the door and shot them in the head. I mean, that definitely sounds like what you described. Probably what happened, and that's wild. I feel like I should contribute. Walking along the track one evening doing an inspection. It was in a station, kind of crowded, and lots of people were watching me work because people are naturally nosy, especially when someone is walking on the track that their train is coming on. So I'm walking along, and I see a rat run across the track about 10 feet in front of me. I know a rat in the area. Now I know not to be startled when I see it again in a minute. I keep walking and go to step over a pile of garbage. I see the first rat out of the corner of my eye, plus a bonus dead rat in the garbage pile. As I was stepping over the garbage, what I thought was a dead rat in between my feet and scared the f*** out of me. This story isn't what you're looking for in terms of scary or creepy, but I hate rats. There used to be an abandoned rubber factory on the edge of my town before it was torn down a couple of years back. I went there once and tried all the doors, but they were barred, but I did find a crack in the concrete wall around the back that was just big enough to slip through. The inside was really neat. There were abandoned boats that must have been in storage for decades there, a bunch of old conveyor belts and factory equipment, all kinds of drug paraphernalia. I found a random painting of Jesus in a makeshift shrine, but that's not the creepy part. I was walking around this abandoned factory at about 8 p.m. just after dark. I look around for an hour or so and decide from some old shit there's really nothing out of the ordinary. Then I hear music start playing, something sort of bluesy somewhere in the factory. I'm not easily scared, and I kind of wanted to figure out what sort of freak was listening to old records in an abandoned factory, because that's something I would do. I track down the noise after about 5 to 10 minutes, and it's in this room in the basement that has the doorway covered with a tarp. I go inside and the room is huge, a contrast from the rest of the dingy, dull old factory. The walls were bright purple, and the room was warm, like there was a space heater in it, whereas the rest of the factory was freezing. There's a cassette player on the floor playing a song, which I later tracked down to be called Eleanor Rigby by the Beatles, but I never found out what the other songs were. And a bunch of papers taped to the walls that all say, "She gotta run, she has to run, she gotta run." If I were to guess, there were at least 100 sheets that said the exact same phrase, just plastered on the walls and lying on the floor. There was a chair that looked like it had been detached from a school desk in the corner, and a statue of an animal that was really badly chipped and burned, like someone was trying to destroy it. There was also a stack of VHS tapes that had names of women on the sides. I only remember seeing Jessica on multiple, but there were a few other names. I left shortly after because I got worried whoever owned all this shit would come back and find me there, and I figured they were in the building with me. I couldn't stop thinking about it for a few weeks. I was convinced it was either a serial killer or some guy with a porn collection that he couldn't risk having at home, or something worse on the tapes, and went back with a friend, but when we got there they'd already started demolishing the place and it was inaccessible. I'll always wonder what was on those tapes, but part of me is glad I don't know. I went with my family to a used bookstore in Utah, like a real legit used bookstore with a vault for priceless manuscript. Anyway, there were stairs down to a basement floor with more of the old notification and non-fiction stuff and record books and stuff like that. The creepy part was that half the basement floor was unlit. So me and my brother are snooping around the bottom floor, and we find an open door over the unlit half of the floor. It's just bright enough to see some empty shelves on the opposite wall through the door. We poke our heads in, and it's so dark we can't see either end of the room. It looks like an endless hallway. Some distance away, we see a blinking red light, and we nope the hell out of there and dash back upstairs. It was probably a security camera or fire alarm or some shit, but it was still scary because I get the feeling it only started blinking once we poked our heads in. There's an abandoned insane asylum in Northville, Michigan that my friends and I explored 3 times. This is the story of the third and final time we ever broke in. I still get chills every time I remember this night. The first 2 times we went, the asylum was actually more interesting than creepy to explore. Both times we happened to run into very friendly people. The first time we ran into another group of high school kids, scared the shit out of them at first. The second time we met a couple stoner Vietnam vets that gave us a tour of the place. It's an entire complex, complete with underground tunnels, morgue, and lots of files and things from the 50s. This time, however, we were alone and only had 2 flashlights between 3 people. Much like the guy with the story about the World War II base, the echoing footsteps sound like they're coming from behind you and always seem to take one more step after you stop. So, after exploring much of the asylum like this and being considerably creeped out already, we decide to head to the main building. It's about 18 stories tall, and the view from the top is pretty cool, because it's by far the tallest building anywhere remotely close, and you can see downtown from up there. Anyway, we're nearing the top of the seemingly endless stair corridor when the girl that's with us freezes and whispers for us to stop. I heard footsteps, she whispers. I tried to tell her it was just footsteps echoing, but when both of them made me shut up and listen, I could hear it as clear as day, the unmistakable sound of footsteps coming from the top floor. Now the building is tall, but very small area-wise, so we were very close to the sound. Still standing on the stairs, we whisper amongst us about what we're going to do. My very stupid friend insists that it's probably just another friendly person, and we should go up and say hi. I try to explain to him that you don't watch or want to meet the kind of people that pace the top floor of an old asylum in the middle of the night. We couldn't convince him, and he goes to head up the stairs, but I was like, this, and just started running down the stairs. Fortunately, he followed us, and we got out of there without ever finding out who or what was walking around up there that night. To top it all off, a cop passing by on the road spotted us after coming out of the building, and we had to run into the asylum complex to get away. I still think back to that night sometimes and wonder who was up there. There were definitely no guards, so it was probably either a gang, there's gang graffiti all over the asylum for the guppies, or the tortured soul of a crazy person. Either way, that was way too close. I remember having an experience once while not in break rules take pictures mode. I was just riding on my local subway, underground slow train basically. It got even slower because of a bend in the tracks. I always loved this area to look out the windows because it was super old and super big, spanning out into an industrial cave if you knew the angles to look. They tried to make it look all posh and hidden, and it's almost impossible to get down into there without tripping one of the 15 plus security systems. I suppose homeless could probably figure it out. Usually the most exciting thing I saw was a construction vehicle. This day I saw a person, hopefully just sleeping in a little cubby. I thought I was the only one to know about. They threw me off balance a little bit. I almost reported it, but decided if I was in that situation and alive, I wouldn't want someone to report me. And if I was dead, I wouldn't care. So decided not to. I do electrical work for a living, and I've been working in old Baltimore lately, and most of the buildings in Baltimore are connected to tunnels. So about a few months ago, I was working on a building in East Redwood Street, putting lights in the tunnels. Well, on my lunch break, I decided to walk around them, so I was walking for about 20 minutes when I thought I heard my foreman call me down one of the halls. I assume he went to look as well, so I started to walk down the hall, and it started to get deeper and colder. I thought about turning around because I didn't want to get lost when I heard it again, so I went a little deeper. Eventually, I hit a room about the size of a baseball court with probably 20-foot-high ceilings. The ground is all sticky, and every step I take sounds like I'm undoing a heavy Velcro strap. There are skulls from small animals everywhere in there that shape in a big triangle that point to a very large dog-like skeleton. At this point, I'm freezing and really scared. I start to smell a harsh burning smell and hear what sounded like a big dog running on concrete. I can hear it get louder and closer. Louder and closer. I start running like I've never run in my life. Finally, after what felt like an hour of running at that full sprint, I run into a staircase with a big heavy metal door at the end of it. I hear the noises now like they are right around the corner. So with all my might and adrenaline-fueled strength, I rip the door open and slam it behind me, and then hear and feel a hard thud against the door. I turn around to see I'm standing under the docks by the Four Seasons and the Marriott Hotel. I call my boss and tell him I got lost in the tunnels and needed to get picked up. Since the day I refused to go in the tunnels under Baltimore or go into the sub-basements in Baltimore.